All right. Well, this is exciting.
It's so exciting.
Um,
We haven't been here together. We haven't been in New York together. The last time we did this, we were in Santa Cruz. It's been a while. This is home, you know?
I know.
This is home. It feels like a long time.
It does feel like a long time.
Yeah.
We were talking this morning about what we wanted to touch on now that we're back together.
Yeah.
And I think we circled around the idea of
Sense of home.
sense of home, what home means, particularly in relationship to loss. And I think if this is sort of in our first time doing this on camera as well as on microphone, like it felt important and contextually relevant to have it be a little bit origin story-ish. And I think home is like our Venn diagram of losing your mom at 6 and me at 18. And I was trying to remember that really like wildly passed around the internet poem, right? And it's
The Rupi Kaur
the
poem?
Rupi Kaur poem, which is called Mother. The first country I ever lived was my mother. And yeah, so I think that's sort of where we wanted to start.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. I was falling asleep last night thinking about how gravely affected I was by my sense of home completely changing. I already feel emotional just talking about this.
I love it.
You're like, dramatic effect. Let the tears go.
Let's do it.
No, but you know, my house was under renovation when my mom
When she
died.
was sick?
And they never finished it. It just like was left as like this home that was in shambles, like literally in shambles. The foyer was a construction site.
And your dad was never...
No, we just left it as it was.
Phil.
Yeah. And there was such a cold sense in the house after she died. There was no warmth left. We were renovating. There's no mother.
Yeah.
And we were renovating because my great-grandmother was moving in with us, who was such a bitch.
Is that Grandma Sally?
No, that was her husband's mother, Nana Ruth. And my mother was the only person who'd take her in. And we had to renovate the house to make room for her.
Yeah.
And it just got left unfinished with her in the house instead of my mother, right? It was this like
this
strange
is not
swap.
the trait I wanted.
Yeah. She was really cruel, especially to my sister. But in thinking of sense of home, I remember running around to friends' houses, like seeking it.
Yeah.
And it's funny, actually, my neighbor, who we spent so much time with, I basically moved into their house. Years later, I found out that there was so many issues in that house, but it felt so warm in contrast to my home that I didn't notice. It was like, this is normal, this is what family means.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there were a lot of mental issues happening in the home, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
But
grass is not always greener, or
No.
it's greener in some ways.
Yeah. And it's interesting, actually, when I moved out to Santa Cruz, even though I had so many wonderful apartments that I like in New York and started to make a sense of home for myself, it wasn't until Santa Cruz that I really felt a deeper rooted sense of home, which is so strange because I was so uprooted from my history here.
When you came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right, that we're here in New York, which is your home of origin.
Yeah.
And I was in Santa Cruz.
Which is your home of
which
origin.
is my home of origin. And you came out when you sort of fled this place.
Yeah.
And then I sort of, in a very different reasons, had to flee there.
Yeah.
You know, for my own, like, Joseph Campbell moment.
Yeah. That is interesting. We both had very dangerous situations we were running from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about how, and we talked about this morning, right? Like that there's home, like physical space, like this space that we're in, which is my home currently, and I hope for a while because I'm super happy here. But there's home that we live in, that we grow up in, that we create as adults. And then there's like the more sort of existential idea of like the home we make in ourselves. And I think a lot of that stuff with loss, that like bifurcation can happen because, particularly if we're being specific to our losses, you know, losing your mom is losing your home existentially, you know, and physically. I mean, when my mom died, I had just turned 18 and I like literally lost my home. There was no more place to go back to. My sort of stepdad had said to me, "Oh, no problem, you can leave."
No problem, you could leave.
Fuck out of here.
Yeah.
No, he was like, "Yeah, you can leave some of your mom's stuff," because I was like wildly destabilized. But then I got a call, I don't know, 4 months later when his new girlfriend moved in, saying like, "You have 36 hours to come get your things, your mom's stuff." And I had to drive up from LA and like go into the house that she died in with this new woman who I'm sure is lovely, I think. Like
Maybe.
sitting on the, who knows, sitting on the couch and like picking her stuff out of the house, like extracting her from his life.
Yeah.
And like putting him in my car and like driving back at night. I don't know how I stayed awake, but it's interesting the loss of physical home. And I think what happens is, I was thinking about this after we spoke this morning, when you lose a physical home, like in some ways you sort of also have this like exodus from your body, because like nothing feels safe anymore. And so you sort of like, you're like out seeking in the world, like you were talking about seeking home in other places, other people's homes. But it's like, then you also go out in the world and you're just like, what feels like home, or what doesn't feel as sad as here? Here being either this physical space or my body, right?
Yeah.
Like my physical self is so full of sorrow.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, the sorrow versus honor. But, you know, it's interesting, the swapping, right?
Yeah. And it's funny too, the little detail of just a couple months later, your mother's, were they married? Her boyfriend moved someone else in. My dad very quickly moved another woman in. Yeah.
It's interesting how sometimes men really need someone to take care of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be mothered. We all need to be mothered.
And to create their own sense of home, right?
Yeah. I think that, I mean, what do you think, why do you think that Santa Cruz felt, because it didn't feel a sadness of New York, and New York was your mom, and like what made Santa Cruz feel like?
New York didn't feel as much like my mom. I had made it my own New York was my mother, my grandparents, my father, like both sides of the family were from the Bronx and from Brooklyn. Like that was everybody settled here. I think because I was able to actually unhook from a lot of the, a lot of my ancestry and make my own sense of self more robust, in that we find ourselves in, we find ourselves in a sense of home when we really can find ourselves. And I remember actually when I was little, I was probably trying to regulate my nervous system actually. I would go to the nurse's office like every day in school.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Something? I need to.
Yeah. And actually when there was an actual emergency, they were like,
like Victoria? Get
girl
out of here.
who cried wolf. But I would sit on a cot in the nurse's office almost all day in school and just like breathe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it meditating, but I was definitely trying to regulate myself. And I think having the distraction of the other students and like normal kids complaining and doing their thing and playing and all of that, I needed to extract myself. And it kind of feels similar in the Santa Cruz moving. I needed to extract myself.
Yeah.
I think for me, I found such a deep sense of connection in those redwoods. And the ocean was obviously, you know, coming from New York, we're surrounded by water. That was always so important to me to be coastal. But there was something about those redwoods. When I first showed up at your house, actually, in Bonnie Doon, I was like, oh, there's magic here.
Yeah.
And this other part of myself was able to emerge that had not been related to, I never really felt like the other people in my upbringing.
Yeah, you are not those Long Island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never felt at home in Long Island.
Yeah.
Ever.
I mean,
Brooklyn more, you know, but yeah. I think that the trees did it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was doing, like, there's always a moment where there's like this kind of, people will ask me, they'll be like, oh, do you talk about ghosts? And I'm like, not on purpose. Like, but yeah, I mean, they come up. But when I was, over COVID, I did this like Zoom call with Elliot and Blake's friend, the Awakenist. You know, he's like a
I've done a call with him.
It was great. And so we all had to practice like channeling and like looking at stuff. And I went into this place, I don't know what you would call it, but the trees were like a huge part of it. And my mom, because my mom lived in Bonnie Doon in the 70s. That's why some of the shenanigans I was always like, first. And they do feel really magical. And to some degree, I think I had to get myself away from them because I was like, it's too fucking close.
Yeah.
Like, and also they're lovely, but it doesn't feed me in the same way as like walking around New York City and like all of the heartbeat and the pulse of everybody being here.
Yeah.
But it's funny, the swap. And I do think that, you know, us being, I was telling Mark last night that there's a lot, it takes a lot of love and care and energy to keep like our connection. I mean, our connection is like unbreakable and forever and ever, like lifetimes over.
Yeah.
But I was telling him that it's such an indication of like how much we love each other and how much like our relationship matters that we keep it so buoyed across the distance of the West Coast and the East Coast. Because text is weird, like screens are weird, you know? And so I was just saying how like when you came on Monday and we could like sit on the couch, I like how much I missed that. But how, you know, how much I think this is like a, you know, a trauma response, a coping mechanism, or like a learned like super skill is like when you know what it can feel like to lose someone you love, you know how fucking important it is to like not let that happen.
Yeah.
Like even in the beginning of like when I moved and there was like a little bit of stretch of like minor disconnection, we like fixed it, you know, because I think that's a little bit of we used to talk a lot about the superpowers of grief, which can sound really obnoxious. So we don't talk about it as much that way. But I think there's something about understanding that gaping hole of someone missing that can make you incredibly aware of and good at and practiced at like keeping relationships. Like I think one of the things we wanted to do by doing some of this like in person on camera was like contextualize these conversations because it's awesome to hear them, but I do think that like the whole idea in some ways is like I would have fucking died if I could have watched people talk about the stuff I was feeling when I was like totally out to sea after my mom died. And so in some ways, like being able to keep our relationship palpable, to make it work to get together in person to do this, like, is the honor, you know, of like trying to reframe the conversations around grief and death from a place of sorrow to a place of honor.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, there's so many themes of contrast that are coming up right now, and I could dive into a whole thing around that and why that's so important. But, you know, in thinking about the talks that we're having about death and loss and grief, it's so important that we have the contrast of being alive and embodied, like here, and presence, and showing our bodies and showing our faces, and
because we're
presenting
actual human people.
The contrast of how important it is to celebrate life, and we learn that through death. You know?
Yeah. Well, when we were watching, when I was telling you a little bit about like Eat Flowers yesterday, and we were listening.
Oh, that quote.
Yeah, and Sig said, you know, I miss my friend, and, you know, I try and think about her energy being here, but the body is not nothing. I was really struck by that because I feel like there's this like tendency for us culturally, us digitally, to be like, you know, I'm with this. I don't mean to be.
Well, it's both. We're not saying one side is better or worse than the other, but it's so important to...
The body isn't nothing. Like, when someone fucking dies, you miss them and it's sad. And, like, you being here in person is not nothing. Like, yeah, we can sustain our connection digitally, but, you know, being physically with people is not nothing.
Yeah, it's actually really important. It's really important. Yeah, and I think that if we talk about the celebration of being embodied, you know, I was actually thinking about this the other day. A friend of ours, you know her, but I'm not going to mention her name.
I'm not going to say her name. Protect the innocent.
She recently lost her dog, and she's been doing a lot of posts of replacing loss with beauty, and she's been showing places where her dog used to rest, and putting like a bouquet of flowers, or putting a kind note, that somebody wrote to her in her grief, you know, and it's interesting, right? Because when Joycey also lost her dog, she was like, I have to keep going with the ritual of, you know, bringing their medication out and preparing the food for a month.
Really?
Yeah, to help her with her mourning process, because the physicality, that's the loss, right? And if you can engage in the physicality in some way, shape, or form, I think it can help transition us through that extremely painful part of grief, while also connecting into the memory, the energetics, you know, the more quantum space of feeling in connection to somebody, and the love that's absolutely forever present. But the loss of the body it's important to recognize. It's painful.
Yeah, it's the fucking
the
worst.
pain part.
I was, as you're saying that, I'm realizing too that, like, the sense of home, right? Like, we can't really truly feel a sense of home unless we're like at home in our bodies. And in so many ways, like, regardless of death and loss, we sort of have a habit of like of divorcing ourselves from our bodies, whether it's because of beauty like, there's so many ways in which we're trying to like numb out. And I think that what's interesting also is like looking at the transitions of, I mean, you were 6, I was 18, but when I think about how quickly I had to exit my body at 18 to not feel like I thought I would die. I was so sad. And then so it figuratively, literally did not feel safe to like be in my body, because I'm like, this place is like
riddled in pain.
Yeah. And so the exit can look like many things. It can look like,
for me, it was purging.
I was going to say, it can look like bulimia.
Yeah.
I mean, thank God that, thank God we figured ways out of that. But it can look like a lot of things. And I think some of the thing about this transition, remember I was telling you how the exodus away from California, and the other thing is like you drove across the country from New York, and I drove across the country sort of like a crazy person from California with 2 young people and 2 giant dogs in the back of our leased Volvo, but
With Mark.
with Mark. You know, that there are these transition moments that you sort of, when you're in them, it's less obvious that they're happening. And then when you get towards the end of a chapter, you're like, oh shit, this moment is happening. And in having awareness of that being a thing I'm in, it's very, very clear to me that that has only become possible because I've been able to like come back home to my body.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It was interesting thinking about that drive. I remember going through the Holland Tunnel by myself in the car.
Yeah.
Like white knuckling it. Like I remember the moment where I was like, okay, you're doing it now. Like you're leaving. It's time. The car is packed. Everything's going. And I think it was like a Beyonce song. I was probably listening to the Lemonade album or something and crying hysterically. But that
was a good move.
It was a good move. It was a very powerful move. But I remember going through the Holland Tunnel and being like, I just exited New York. Yeah. Like I felt the transition happening. Yeah. And I felt my mother next to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the Holland Tunnel, it's funny because we came in the Holland Tunnel to come in, and New Jersey's like such a fucking nightmare. The freeway.
Armpit.
But like the freeways, you're just like, am I going to make it to New York? Like, am I on the right exit? Am I going to end up in like Montclair or Edgewood? I don't know. But when we came through, you know, this was 1.5 years ago, and Lucian, who was 7 turning 8, we kind of were like, okay, this is like, you know, because we took him from his home. Yeah. He was excited, but we had, I think he like really, he asked if he could listen to the Taylor Swift New York song, and I was like, fucking absolutely not. Absolutely
like, whose child are you?
No.
Where did you come
from? And so we like compromised on like Jay-Z and Alicia Keys, because like there had to be a moment. You have to, you know, make all the memories.
And music so does that.
We're coming through the tunnel, and then it's like Alicia Keys, and like had the moment. But it was, you know, it's like there's a little bit of like birth canal in that tunnel, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that fucking tunnel.
I know. I hate it.
Yeah. Well, and it's also interesting to think about that juxtaposition between body, memory, energy, love, quantum, all of it, because it all lives in the body, right? It's an extension of the body, and it's also intracellular, right?
Yeah. And
there was so much deep programming and thinking about even the purging of me trying to extract the pain to find a place in my body that felt safe. It wasn't until actually very recently, it was probably 1 year ago now, that I had a psychedelic experience where I really rewrote the story. I really let go of something. I went into the experience with the sole purpose of, there is memory in my body that's keeping me trapped, and it's not mine. I felt like I had such a death program from my mother and her fear.
You really, that was your
life. Yeah. Well, you're 6.
Like a serious little scientist, and your little 6-year-old was like, you know.
I picked up on so much, I think, of the imprinting of my mother's fear, because she had no time to process the fact that she was dying. She was diagnosed and died in 3 weeks. Yeah. And I think my body was so vigilantly holding on to the anxiety around that. And I was like, I have to let this go. It never felt like it was mine, right? It felt so inherited in that way. And I remember going into the journey with that intention. And the second I dropped in, there she was. Yeah. And I was like, oh, fuck, I have to do this. I have to cut this tie. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I have to trust myself and do this. I have to cut this tie. And I watched her just drift away. Yeah. And I was like, oh no, oh no, oh no, did I do the wrong thing? And I started to panic. And then I was like, remember your intention, remember your intention.
I think this is like such a Victoria Sturkin story.
And then I had to like bring myself back down. And then Joyce pops up. And I was like, oh, fuck, I have 2 mothers in this lifetime. Now I have to say goodbye to you too. And she was like, yeah, but we're all right here.
Yeah.
We're all right here.
Yeah.
And yeah, you do have to let go. And I taught you all of this, and it's in you. It's okay. And then I let her go. And then I had this exquisite rebirth where I felt the sense of mother, the sense of home was actually earth. And I felt so rooted to the planet.
Yeah.
And it was wild to feel the amount of energy coming up into my heart from my connection with planet Earth, that it was coming out from my heart into my arms. I remember pushing my wrists up to the sky. And I was like,
Superman moment.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my God, this is why babies start crawling. Because their hearts are connected to earth, and we need to explore. We need to embody our sense of being alive and explore the planet that we come from. And it was just this incredible rebirthing moment. But the point is, it's so interesting to me how memory is so alive in us. These people who we've lost are so alive in us. And it's also extremely important for us to find a sense of embodiment that's also our own.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the hard, we've talked about this before, which you have very few memories of your mom, and I have the opposite. And
I would say very few explicit memories. Intrinsic memory, I think, is running through my veins.
Sure, and less because you had 6 years. There's no value placed on more or less.
No, I just wanted to make the distinction.
Yeah. But like navigating and reassessing our relationship to memory, understanding what is ours, what is not ours, like that was your mom's stuff you had sort of taken on. Mm-hmm. And I think some of it is, some of it is like, trying to drop in, and I'm realizing as I'm thinking that there's this, it probably shouldn't be always that we're only in versus divorced from our body. Like, obviously we want to be embodied, but like, to me, the key has been in the like state of general and utter happiness that I live in now, which is like, you can do both. Mm-hmm. You can be totally like in your body, and then you can have moments where you're just like, I kind of want to be out, and I kind of want to be playing around like out in the world in a different way. And I think that like that flexibility and that ability to kind of like dip your toe in and out again, which is sort of the difference of, having a relationship with. So did I tell you about how, like, I don't talk to my mom. Like, it's just not. People will be like, well, I talk to. Like, I don't have that. And I had that experience with Venus, where she connected with my mom. But that a few months ago, I was at the Y on the treadmill. Oh, I was telling you.
Oh, yeah.
And how, like, I'm on the treadmill, and I, like, hear her almost shrieking in my head, and I was like, what the fuck is going on here?
What was she saying?
Pay attention.
Pay attention.
Pay attention.
Pay attention.
And it was like I could almost hear her voice. Like, it was like dropped down to like a tone that would perk my ears up, because I hated when she yelled at me when I was a kid. No one likes that. No one likes being yelled at generally. But like hearing that, like having that kind of energetic relationship, it drops in for a little bit and then it goes away for a while, because sometimes you don't want to just be like in constant communication with wherever.
Yeah, it could be distracting.
Like, sometimes you want to talk to them, sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
I think that I think feeling safe in my body makes it feel quite powerful to decide when and where.
Yeah.
Versus being like affected and visited or you know, surprise. We talk a lot about how grief can like surprise you out in the world. Music, sound, smell,
anything
like
can be a
sense,
trigger.
memory.
Yeah, anything could be a trigger. And I think that as you were talking before, the concept of disassociation kept coming up. I think that it's so important. Disassociation gets a really bad rap, and I think it's actually a really powerful defense mechanism.
Totally.
When we're in deep grief, a lot of us disassociate completely from our bodies because it's way too painful.
Totally.
And how amazing that our nervous systems can do that.
Like, bye.
Thank fucking God. Sometimes you're like, oh, good, I could just check out.
Yeah.
But it's the practice of coming back in.
Right. Well,
and
that's
learning.
the trick, right? Of having to figure out how to get back in. But once you are, there's a little bit of a playfulness and like being able to go in and out.
Yeah, and finding more choice and flexibility in our capacity to do that, and bringing in that concept of choice and flexibility and a sense of home and a sense of safety. You know, we were talking about this last night, that we can't really feel at home unless we feel safe.
Right.
And we can't really access choice unless we feel safe. And therefore we can't access freedom unless we feel safe.
I know. Book club.
Yeah.
I think there's there's a thing that I am incredibly proud of you.
Tell me.
Tell me.
Tell me.
I know we are still orphans. Tell me what you like about.
Yeah.
Is like when you left New York and came, the difference between the state you were in.
Oh, wildly different.
Is like night and day.
I think it's why I identify Santa Cruz as being this place where I could feel more at home, because I unhooked from so much patterning that was really keeping me stuck in so many ways in terms of interpersonal relationships, romantic relationships, my career.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I really found freedom in California.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wild, beautiful, like...
And it's in vast contrast to New York, right? And this was all I knew.
Yeah,
and
right.
to be able to really explore in that way, especially on my own, just felt so incredibly powerful. It was scary. It was very scary.
Yeah.
But again, contrast is so important. That fear led me into such a sense of safety that I've never experienced before.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you're saying that, I'm realizing that, to me, I got so used to like being afraid and having to do it anyway, because after my mom died, there was no home, there was there were no parent, like there was just like, it was so, I used to explain it as like this makes me feel old again, the Super Mario Brothers, and I mean like the first one with like the little rectangular controller and the like where I think it was Mario, I mean I know which one Mario is, but like, you know, they jump from like thing to thing and it drop out from under you, and that 100% felt like my life for a very long time after my mom died. And so some of it was just the trick was figuring out how to stay put long enough to not just be fleeing and not be like running. And so I think it's, you know, to some degree there is some resolution. And I think what works for us is that like you feel far because you are far away, but like you never feel far. And I think that is like that's the gift. You know, I remember we've talked about this before in different episodes, that like people always talk about like the club you don't want to be in, but it's like the gift you didn't ask for.
Yeah.
You're like, I didn't put that shit on my list. But if it has to happen, like those are things that I think I wish someone had explained to me at 18, at 17 when she was dying, at 18, at 19, at 20, at 21. Like, this fucking sucks. I promise it will change, but also like this is a little bit like Jedi training, and you will be grateful.
Yeah.
You can't take it back. I know you would if you could.
Yeah.
But like mutant school, Jedi school, I know there isn't Jedi school, right? That's not a thing, but like theoretically.
There's Yoda teachers.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
a Yoda teacher. You know, that these, you know, I think that like if we had to list to Lucian, he loves a list. What's your best basketball era? I'm like, bro, I don't. But you know, if you had to like list 5 things that like you get to know, like the secret stuff that you learn, the wisdom, like I think, you know, one of those things would be like our survivability and like our capacity for like resilience, flexibility, all those things we used to talk about a lot, doing the other stuff. That to me, if there's nothing else that we do, particularly in this context of like talking in person, like if I could scream through a screen at every 6-year-old, not that I would want to scream at a 6-year-old, but you know what I mean? 6-year-old, 17-year-old, like this is gonna feel like the bottom of a well for a while, and I promise your life will be like infinitely more special than you could possibly imagine, because look, look, you're like thriving, I'm thriving. Like to me, it's like I think that was also one of the like the things that mattered so much about starting these conversations in the first place, was like there's a lot of time and energy put into like the first year after someone dies. There's like a lot of kid gloves, there's a lot of, and then it's like people forget, as the David Kessler said, like how long are you going to grieve? And well, how long is someone dead? Like this is a forever thing. And it's not about fixing something, it's about learning to like live with this character, like our grief that like lives out in the world, and learning how to have a relationship with this thing that will visit you and this thing that ends up like teaching you.
Well, and I think for me, something that I really wanted and want to come across for our listeners in the stage of grief that we're at today is to show process. And to talk about all the different stages that we went through. It didn't always feel like this, where we could talk in this way where it was...
No, it felt like garbage.
And it was really hard and really painful for so long. And there were so many different iterations of moving through that pain and alchemizing it. But it's so important, I think, for people to understand that there is process to it. It doesn't stay the same. And we can learn and grow with it, and we can become so empowered by it and actually more embodied because of it, because there's a deeper appreciation for life.
Because the body's not nothing.
Because the body's not
nothing. And I think some of the things I think that like mean so much to us to be able to like play around with in the future of these conversations, in person, not in person, are what that process can look like. Like, what are the things, you know, I talk about all the time, like music saved my life. Like, what are the things that allow us to transmute the terror into something beautiful? So I'm really excited about like those moments in the future.
Too many moments in the future.
Too many moments in the future. Forever and ever. The body is not nothing.
Well, I feel like that concludes it.